Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube, and please do not adjust your camera. I did not comb my hair for this video. Given the fact that we are in a self-quarantine situation, I figured it best to go all natural. So when I wake up in the morning, this is pretty much how I look. Deal with it. That said, in today's video, what I really want to talk about is how the antiques and collectibles trade responds to a recession or an economic downturn. A lot of my viewers, a lot of the people that read my articles for Antiques and Auction News and some other blogs and publications that I write for from time to time have reached out to me and have been asking me what markets are the most stable during an economic downturn and or a, dare I say, depression. Now, to be fair, the 2008-2009 financial crisis taught us a lot of lessons, not only about finance, how the Fed is supposed to work, meaning the government and the Fed, and how they regulate the monetary system, at least in the United States, but also it taught us a lot about the antiques and collectibles trade. What trends were emerging, what trends died out during that time, because believe it or not, there were some collecting categories that went belly up and bust during that particular time period that never really fully recovered. I could do a whole video on that if you guys are interested. But what I want to talk about today is there's roughly 5 key categories in the antiques and collectibles trade that really weather a recession well. Or it's not that the items maintain value, it's that in most cases they don't drop in value substantially. Or on the other side of the equation, they tend to sometimes increase in value because the people that have money that are using the antiques and collectibles trade as an alternate asset source, they still go in and they still buy these items, especially during recessions or downturns in the economy. Now, to be fair, the average person that plays in these markets that we're going to discuss in this video, they do tend to pull off the gas a little bit during an economic downturn or an economic recession. It's no different than if you're somebody out there that makes $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year and you collect high-end coins, traditional antiques, even collectibles. If you're pumping $10,000 to $20,000 into that market a year, and all of a sudden a recession comes, your income gets cut, you lose your job, your business is kind of in a downturn as a result, chances are you're not going to put $10,000 to $20,000 every year going forward into that collecting category, into those high-end antiques, into those coins and currency that you used to collect. You're going to pull back a little bit. Well, it's no different in the high-end market as well. There are some people that if they make $1 million, $2 million, $5 million a year, let's say that they're investing in high art or they're putting in some of these collecting categories as an alternate asset, if a downturn comes and it affects their income, they may pull back a little bit. Now, to be fair, if you can afford a $100 million painting in good times, you can most likely afford a $100 million painting in bad times, assuming that you are a prudent investor who understands economics and finance, which if you have $100 million at your disposal, I would assume that you are in that particular category. So we got to look at some of these collecting categories. And on the flip side of the equation, we have to look at what markets do not weather an economic downturn or a recession, as well as some of these higher end markets. Because you see, guys, one of the things that I teach on this particular channel is if you want to make money in antiques and collectibles over the long term, meaning you want to use the antiques and collectibles trade as an alternate asset class to build wealth, you must go after rare and scarce items in established markets that have a lot of demand, and that demand must be stable. So a lot of the markets that I recommend on this channel for long-term investment, whether we're talking about traditional antiques, coins, currency, collectible first edition books, historical documents, artwork, those markets are extremely established. A lot of you guys are really taking on an awful lot amount of risk by going into some of these unestablished markets, thinking that over time demand is going to accelerate in those markets, not realizing that there's a lot of speculation in those markets. It is very easy for someone to come in to the Magic the Gathering community, the Pokemon collecting community, the vintage and graded video game community, and just with $500,000, $1 million. Simply manipulate that market. I manipulated markets in the past. I've talked about this on this channel during the wonderful pre-Nintendo video game boom that happened between 1995 and 2005. I saw the writing on the wall. I knew that market was going to bust, and eventually it did. There's people that are sitting there that spent $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 to collect mass collections of Atari 2600 games and television games, ColecoVision games, all of that stuff. And today, if they go to sell it, they're going to sit at a 30 to 70% loss. It is insane. Those markets are too speculative. I'm not sitting here arguing that Nintendo is not going to be coveted 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line. Most likely, Nintendo will always be a pop culture icon, no different than Marvel Comics, DC Comics, Star Wars, and the like. That doesn't mean, though, that just on the basis of that alone, that makes those particular vintage items a good investment. I've spent an awful lot of time on this channel explaining that concept. If you're new to this channel, and this is the first video you're watching, please go back through my feed and look at my earlier videos where I talk about that in depth. If you guys want me to do more videos on that particular topic where I break down the dynamics and the fundamentals, let me know in the comment section below, and I will. So what markets are pretty much immune in a recession or an economic downturn? Now, some of the items on this list are probably going to surprise some of you. Others are probably not going to surprise you, assuming that you've watched some of my earlier videos on this particular channel. So let's start. First and foremost, high-end art. High-end art, and what I'm talking about here is pretty much pieces of art that sell for $100,000 or more. The people that are buying in that area of the market are really at the top 10% tier of the art market. Most people watching this video, I can pretty much guarantee, will most likely never spend $100,000 on a piece of art. I would venture to say if this video would ever get 500,000 views, maybe 1% of my viewing audience will ever be in a position where they can afford to spend $100,000 or more on one piece of art. That said, there are people out there that can do that regularly. Some of these people also have pieces in their collection that sell or are valued at millions of dollars a piece. That segment of the art market is usually overall immune to downturns in the economy. If you don't believe me, go back during the 2008-2009 economic recession and look what emerged around the year 2010-2011. There was a bubble emerging in high-end art. That's because as the economy was working its way back, the people that benefited the most started putting their money in high-end art and other items of that nature that they knew would accelerate in value along with the growth of the economy. Then when the economy recovered, a lot of other people that were making bank or making a lot of money were able to enter that market, and maybe that $100,000 painting that so-and-so bought is now worth $125,000 or $150,000 or maybe even $250,000. Now, that's not to say all high-end art goes up in value exponentially. It does not. But if somebody buys right and understands that market it tends to be immune from economic recessions and downturns. Next, let's talk about traditional investment-grade antiques. Now, what do I mean here? I mean antiques in the top 15, 10, 5% of the market, where if you're analyzing the market for antiques and you want to get into this sector of the market, you really have to know what you're doing. There is no third-party grading company that's going to help you in this sector of the market. There's a lot of what-ifs in this market. You really have to do your homework. You have to know what you're doing. You have to work with not only an auction house, but possibly a couple of experts in the trade that can guide you in this sector of the market. But traditionally, the top 10, 15, 5% of the antiques market, the stuff that's selling for, on average, $5, $10, $15, $20,000 or more, that particular market is generally immune to economic downturns and depressions simply because the people that are playing in that market tend to have more money and knowledge than the average person out there that is just speculating or attempting to invest in collectibles. That sector of the market is secure. It's been that way for decades, if not longer, guys. I mean, I can do a study where I can go back and I can pretty much tell you what the popular antique trends were in the 1800s if I wanted to. That's how far back antique collecting goes, even coin and currency collecting. We're going to get to that in a little bit on this list. But the one thing you got to understand, there's a reason why you can go out onto the market today and you can buy an 1881 proof Liberty seated quarter. Back in the 1800s, believe it or not, coin collecting was popular. People collected coins. Those coins that people collected back then, because it wasn't as popular as it is today, are worth a lot of money because demand accelerated, and also value of those particular items, if they were quote-unquote scarce and in high grade, that also accelerated for those items. That's why over the long term, coins and currency are a great investment. I still stand by that, even to this day. Next on this list, we're going to go to antique firearms and related weaponry. Antique firearms, not contemporary firearms. Antique firearms are one of the staples of the antiques and collectibles trade. So are edged weapons. If you're buying the right items and you're going after truly scarce and quote-unquote rare items in this sector of the market, you can do very well. And the items hold up in value during a recession or an economic depression overall. Now, to be fair, there's always exceptions to every rule. Some of these markets will show a 5, 10, possibly a 20% decline at any given time. That's normal. However, most of these markets are always standing up well when compared to equal or equivalent collectible markets. Whether you're looking at vintage toys, whether you're looking at a lot of these more speculative markets that I've already named, whether we're talking about vintage video games, Magic the Gathering cards, Pokemon cards, graded video games, even vintage comic books. Believe it or not, the reason why vintage comic books are doing so well right now is because they're in a speculative bubble. Yes, it's an established market, but it's extremely speculative at present time. There's a lot of people that are unfortunately equating vintage comic books with the strength of coins, currency, the high-end traditional antique market, even autograph collecting. Autograph collecting is a much more stable market than vintage toys and vintage comic books. And I'm going to be doing more videos on autograph collecting, historical document collecting as time goes on here. But make no mistake, the people that are equating vintage comic books with investment-grade coins, currency, traditional antiques, high-end artwork are making a drastic mistake. And over the next coming decades, they're going to get caught with their pants down if they keep investing in those particular collectibles and they don't understand that pretty much now is the time to sell that stuff, not buy it. Prices have accelerated too much in the last 5 to 10 years for price increases in the vintage comic market to keep going up. It is not going to happen. Now let's talk about another collectible category here, antique maps and historical documents. If you are going after rare, authentic, antique maps and also historical documents that have scarcity and a lot of historical importance, those items hold up very well in an economic downturn or an economic depression. So those are items where you may find them selling at a discount of maybe 5 or 10%, but overall, those items will always have a market if you are buying right. Last but not least, we do need to talk about coins and currency. I've said this before, I'll say it again. One of the most established, stable collecting categories in the entire antiques and collectibles trade, if you have the knowledge and you know what you're doing, is coins and currency. The market has a market cap of $3.5 billion to $4 billion per year, just when we're looking at collectible coins. That means we're not even counting sales of bullion-related coins, people who are going after generic gold coins. We are just looking at the market for collectible coins. Every year, $3.5 billion to $4 billion of collectible coins changes hands in that particular market. It is one of the largest markets in the antiques and collectibles trade, and I'm going to warn you right up front, there's a lot of sharks, there's a lot of people in that market that know how to pounce, and they have a lot of experience, and chances are if you're just starting out, they have tons more experience than you. So you really have to know what you're doing. You got to study the market. You have to be willing to take a risk. You have to be willing to be patient if you're going to play in that segment of the market. I've talked about this a lot in my earlier videos. So there's an example of 5 collecting categories: high-end art, traditional investment-grade antiques, remember the top 10, 15% of the market, antique firearms and related edge weapons, coins and currency, and antique maps and rare historical documents. Those markets hold up the best in an economic recession or downturn. Now, what's the loser out of all this? Well, I hate to say it, guys, collectibles. Your vintage Magic cards, your Pokemon cards, your video games, your graded video games, your computer games, your vintage toys. Now, am I sitting here telling you that a $10,000 graded video game is going to go to $5,000 due to the economic recession that we're in, or the upcoming economic recession that's going to result when the economy and everything grasps what's happening with the coronavirus and all these businesses being closed for the last 30, 60 days? No, I'm not stating that, because the vintage and graded video game marketplace, as well as Magic the Gathering and Pokemon marketplaces, have one advantage. They're right now encased in a massive speculative bubble. Speculators will do whatever they can to still buy those items during an economic downturn. They will literally bankrupt themselves to trip over each one another on the way to bankruptcy court to be able to buy those particular items. Make no mistake. And what's going to happen is those particular collecting categories are going to remain stable and strong through this because, again, they're encased in a speculative bubble. No different with vintage comic books. No different with certain segments of the vintage toy market. Now, that gets a little nuanced because certain vintage toys make better investment choices overall than others. I'll cover that in an upcoming video. So I hope this video finds you well. I hope I answered some of your guys' questions out there, because I know a lot of you want me to do more videos on economic downturns and the state of the antiques and collectibles trade. Please stay safe, be kind. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.